Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Jeff Elkins. Hi, everyone. I am that gal. I am Lori Ann, and I am from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I'm with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas, and we'd like to welcome you to our Lift Your Story podcast.
So this episode, we're very pleased to have Jeff Elkins, and he's a writer, editor, and a ghostwriter with a lot more stories behind that. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. I feel the need to say where I'm from because you guys did too. But yeah, just north of Baltimore. But I did, Roy, spend a ton of time in Dallas when I was younger. My family's all from Corpus Christi, Texas, and Houston, Texas. So I have that Texas blood in me. And I went to Baylor University for my undergrad and Truett Seminary for my master's degree. So I was in Waco before Waco was like, you know, Chip and Joanna Gaines land. So there was nothing there when I was there. So we used to drive to Dallas to go to the movies. I love Dallas. It's a great city.
Yeah, it's a pretty good place. So you're an author, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm an author of, I started writing about 7 years ago. So I have 10 novels on the market that you can go get. I've got a mystery series and a urban fantasy series that follows homeless superheroes through the streets of Baltimore. The mystery series follows two detectives. One of them can relive people's memories. So those two series are out, and then I've got some standalone books as well. I also am an editor. I run a service called The Dialogue Doctor. That's a podcast and a weekly newsletter, and I help writers write better dialogue. And then I also started in 2019 working as a ghostwriter. So if you have a story that you want to tell, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I can help you do that. So yeah, all of that encompasses my writing life. And that's just my night job. During the day, I work for a tech company that simulates difficult conversations for professionals to practice with. So it's a full workload. Anything writer I do.
How does that work, your full-time job?
I lead the writing team for that company. So we do what we do is we sit down. We usually work through like NIH grants, or we do a lot of work with the military, and we sit down, or a lot of work through universities. We sit down with world experts on a topic, and I'll spend several hours with them, how the conversation goes and what happens. And then my team, we call ourselves professional mimics. So we sit with them and we mimic that conversation. And the product we produce is it looks like a Zoom call, actually, where you're talking to a live actor, but that live actor is a form of AI that is allowing you to practice this super difficult conversation you're having. And our goal as a company is to create these simulations that allow you to practice these conversations before you take them into the real world. So our company is called Simmersion. If anybody's interested, they can go grab it. And that's part of where my ghostwriting comes from, is I've worked as this professional mimic for 7 years and taking those skills and applying them to writing a book as well. So those things kind of merge together.
So it's kind of like a non-threatening way to practice.
Totally non-threatening way to practice. And a lot of times critical conversations are super important, and you can't mess them up, right? Like, we've done a lot of suicide prevention work, and when you're talking to somebody who's having suicidal ideations, you want to make sure that you've had that conversation a couple times. So we create simulations where you can practice each component of that conversation. So when you sit down with somebody that really needs you to be at the top of your game, you're there because you've already practiced it several times. And so I love the job. It's really fantastic. I've been doing it. Like, I started 7 years ago when I started writing novels too. It's the company's growing and it's a lot of fun.
I didn't even know anything like that existed.
Well, we're unique. We're the only ones.
Really, it's really a great concept, but I never even would have considered anything like that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's you can find us over at Simmersion.com, Simmersion.com. Yep, and like I said, that's what I do during the day, and it's been really wonderful for writing Simmersion, working at Simmersion has allowed me to obsess over dialogue and obsess over that how every phrase impacts a conversation and how everything you say impacts the rapport you're having with the other person. So, and I've been able to translate that into my novel writing and into the editing service that I do as the dialogue doctor, and definitely into ghostwriting. It's, you know, I sit down with ghostwriting clients now and have that kind of mimic brain on from my time at Simmersion. So it's yeah, it's been a wonderful experience working there. I love it.
I love the name Dialogue Doctor. So
Thanks. I started the Dialogue Doctor back in the fall. I was actually so you know, y'all have so many great kind of business and thought leaders on here on the Lift podcast. So I was, you know, we hit COVID in 2020, and I have 5 kids, and we live in a small town. And my company, to be safe, was like, everybody go remote. And it was a weird time for me because I had, you know, I write these novels, but I really struggled with networking with other authors and getting to know other authors, which is important for any business, right? Like any business you're starting, small business, it's important to network with other people in your field to get ideas, exchange, and, you know, kind of work together to build to harness the power of the team, especially a business like writing where you're pretty much on your own. Like I have an editor and a cover designer, but you know, when it comes to actually putting words on the page, it's just me. So networking is super important, even just for mental health. And I hadn't done any of it in the first 6 years that I was writing. And I set a goal for myself. I was like, you know what? In 2020, I'm going to go to my first writing conference. And I'm going to go in person. And I found one with these other writers that I super respected. And I was like, man, I can't wait to meet them in person. I've been reading their books and studying their stuff. And sure enough, COVID hit and canceled all of my plans. But one of the writers that was running the conference called me and was like, hey, because we can't do the conference in person, they still had it on Zoom, but because we can't do it in person, I'm going to sit down with you and give you an hour just to talk about whatever you wanted to talk about, which I think ended up for me being 1,000 times better than the conference. Because I sat down with him and I told him, I was like, hey, you know, I've been writing for 6 years. I've learned a ton. The independent author community, the indie author community, which is people who publish without a traditional publisher, they're so giving, and everybody's kind of like, we're in this together. So I had gotten so much for them. So I sat down with him. I was like, well, here's where my fiction is. We talked about that. And then I was like, and you know, I really want to start giving back to the community. I've just been taking, I haven't given anything. And so he was like, well, what do you do for a living? So I told him about Simmersion, and he was like, well, can you train the rest of us in dialogue? I was like, I guess so. So I took on 10 free clients and worked with them. Jay Thorne, the guy who was having that phone call with me, hooked me up with 10 of his friends. And Jay and I did a whole book together. We worked through a whole book together. And they really found it helpful and found that like I was really impacting their writing. And I was like, well, this is clearly a service I can offer. So we started the podcast in August and started the newsletter in September. Since then, I've done close to 100 clients. We just finished a 20-week master course where I took 15 people for 20 weeks and we walked them through. My partner in it is a woman named Laura Hum, who's actually a boss at Simmersion. So we switched roles when we get to the Dialogue Doctor. But so she and I walked people through 20 weeks of how to write dialogue. It was amazing. It was a great time. So yeah, it's really going great, and I love helping other people and talking about editing. If you're interested, if there's a writer listening and you want to check it out, it's dialoguedoctor.com. Podcast is free, of course, and so is the newsletter. You can just start engaging in it right away.
the dialogue's not easy to do in writing. I know, like I'm a writer as well, and it really is, like you said, it's important how it moves along. Of course,
Yeah.
and trying to, you know, stay away from the he said, she said, she said, he said, he said, she said.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's, you know, it's so critical because it's dialogue is what engages our readers in our story. You know, like a professor that I love, Allison Woods Brooks at Harvard, has this great quote. She says that every every relationship you have, whether it's your mother, or father, or best friend, or romantic interest, they can all be summed up in a series of conversations, because that's how we connect with each other, right? We connect through conversation. And so that's why dialogue is so critical in our book, because our readers are connecting to our characters through the conversations our characters are having. So it's so, so important to nail that dialogue and get it right. But like you're saying, Lorianne, it's so hard to do. Like, it's just a tough thing to pull off. So, any tricks I can give people to help do it is, I think, is awesome. We all have these stories within us, right? Like, we have stories that we've lived. We have stories that live in our dreams that we want to tell. And writing is like just another tool. It's like a hammer or a screwdriver. So some of us have spent just a little more time whacking things with a hammer than others. And so if I can help you wield that hammer in a more positive way, that's what I want to do.
When you were going through your master class, did you learn as much as you taught?
I did, actually. So it's funny you say that. So I actually started it to learn. I worked as a preacher for 15 years before I started working as a writer. And I wasn't the preacher that got on stage. I was the guy who ran everything behind the scenes. But every once in a while, I'd lead a small group, or I'd have to speak. And I found that I learned so much more when I had to teach something than when I just like read a book or sat in a class. So that's one of the reasons I did the master course, was I was like, I've got all these ideas flying around and I need to like hone them and really nail them down. So thankfully 15 people were willing to go along with me, or it would have just been a class for me. But they jumped in, and I think the best thing that came out of the course was this illustration we use called the dialogue daisy, that helps people understand what character voice is and builds an image of characterization. And again, you can get that over at the Dialogue Doctor stuff. I won't take you through the whole illustration, but it's it was such a gift to have those students asking me to explain this better. In fact, the course was 4 1-hour videos a week. So I was teaching over video for 4 hours a week, demonstrating things. And I kept demonstrating this one thing of like, this is what character voice is. And one of the students reached out to me and was like, I just need you to slow down and do that better. And I was like, okay. So I spent like a whole day just like pondering, like, how can I illustrate this to the class? And the dialogue daisy came out, where we look at the roots, the stem, and then the blossom of character voice, and what those components are and how to build it as a writer. And then, so things like that come out of teaching that I think are really, really valuable, that I haven't found another way to get. Like, for me, I have to be sharing knowledge with others in order to really understand it myself.
That's kind of what they say, learn, do, teach. Right?
Yeah, learn, do, teach. That's right. Yeah. And hopefully it's not the other, which is, those who can't do teach. Hopefully that's not it. Yeah, I'm going to pretend like that's not what I'm doing, and then it's actually learn, do, teach.
Well, it's interesting you talk about dialogue, because Lori and I have had some guests on, a couple in particular, about words, the words you use. And they were really eye-opening, weren't they, Lori?
They're horrible though, because you become really aware of the fact that, oh my goodness, I do say but a lot, and I don't mean I mean but.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the weird thing about but is, I'm sure y'all talked about this, but it negates everything that came before it. So
exactly.
When you use the word but, yeah, you're actually contradicting everything. It's so weird. I find myself, catching little phrases like that all the time. For my simulation work, that's the kind of stuff we obsess over. So, using and learning to use and in weird places. Like, I found myself like catching it with my kids. Like, instead of saying like but, like, hey, I liked that you did the dishes, but you left the soap out on the counter. Just training your vocabulary. Like, I like that you did the dishes and you left the soap out on the counter. Can you please go pick that up? Right. Like, so just getting that, like, that little change in phrase. But yeah, the other one that always bothers me in words, that if you're writing a character that's completely self-obsessed, it's a great one to use, or a character that thinks very little of others, it's a great word to use, and that word is actually. No one ever says actually without demeaning the other person they're talking to.
You just nailed Lorianne.
Oh, did I really, Lorianne? I'm so sorry.
No, this is what's so funny. I was doing a talk or writing or doing a podcast or something, and I guess a few of them, and I'm looking and I said, oh my goodness, Roy, it's awful. I use the word actually so often, it's pathetic. And then I realized, having noticed it in myself, I started noticing all the other people who were using it.
Yeah, it's one of those words. You just
I'm not alone.
No, just erase that thing from your vocabulary, because what you're communicating to the person you're talking to, whether you mean to or right, is you're wrong. So you might as well just say you're wrong. Like, you're wrong. This is the way it actually is. Right? See, I did it just there. But yeah, there's all kinds of weird language tics like that. And when we're writing characters, even when we're writing like a memoir or a nonfiction book, using those word choices is super important, because whether we know it or not, the voice we're using is what the reader is connecting to. So as the reader reads our voice, if we're telling the reader actually all the time, the reader starts to build that kind of internal defensiveness. Like, why are you saying, or if we're saying but all the time, the reader's ignoring the first half of our sentence without even knowing that it's going on, right? Like, so it's that kind of, it's those kind of small word choices where, I said that like writing is just like learning to swing a hammer. The more you do it, the more you start to pick up like, okay, if I swing it in this way, I'm going to do something with that. And writing dialogue specifically isn't about eliminating those words completely, but it's about using them strategically. So if I'm writing an antagonist that I want to belittle my protagonist all the time, I'm going to use the word actually all the time. I'm also going to use like some firm, directed words like look and listen, so that my antagonist is always like, listen, this is how it's supposed to be. And then I can let my protagonist say something like, well, I don't know that that's the way I want it. And then I can say, my antagonist can say like, actually, this is exactly what you want, right? Like, so making those strategic word choices, you can already start to hear that like very commanding and belittling voice come out of me just with those couple lines. But yeah, those little small word choices make such a big difference in what we do.
I'm really happy that somebody that was running Grammarly or, those editing things pick up on it all the time. I thought, thank you.
I know. If only I could get those in like my handwriting as well. Like I'll fill stuff out my hand and my spelling's terrible and everything's awful. I'm like, where's my word check? I need my grammar check. Yeah. It's funny. My teenagers laugh at me all the time because they're like, without a word processor, Dad, you're almost illiterate. I'm like, yeah, it's completely true. I'll take notes. Can't read my own notes anymore. It's awful.
Well, I knew a guy that one company, some software they had, anything you did, it would automatically edit it and catch the spelling. We left that company and went to another one. And he was just writing stuff, and then the guy said, "Man, what is, you can't spell? You can't. What is the deal here? What are you talking about? Don't you have so and so? No, we don't have that. You've got to spell check it.
Yeah.
He's like, I had no idea, and some of the stuff he wrote was like unprofessional. Let's just say that.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's I remember years ago when text messaging became really prevalent. I can remember people saying like, well, this is the death of writing, right? Like no one's going to write anymore. But I found that I write now more than I ever do, right? Like, and that's just not as a writer. Between emails and just like basic communication, like I am writing all the time. And I got an email today from a friend, and he actually sent me an audio recording in the email. I'd never seen that before, but he decided he didn't want to write it down, so he just recorded it and sent me the audio recording. I was blown away, and I almost felt like I would like more of that, because I'm writing so much. If I could just back it down a little bit. The good news is, for those who struggle with that, is that writing is a muscle, right? Like it's a skill that you can learn over time. You don't have to be great at it to begin with. Like, for example, growing up, I was dyslexic. I hated English, hated writing. It was my least favorite course. I went to high school in New Orleans and in a public school in New Orleans, and just avoided English at any cost. And then when I went to college, I was a little bit of an OCD high performer, always needing to achieve. And I went to college, and English was the only class in my life that I ever failed. And I swore off my freshman year when I failed freshman writing at Baylor. I said, I will never write again. I am done. If I can get out of writing, I will. And so it wasn't until I started my master's degree that I really had to start writing long papers. I can remember I wrote my first 50-page paper for my master's degree, and I kind of sat back and I was like, wow, I can't believe I wrote that much stuff. Now, it was terrible, and nobody should ever read it, and it is hopefully burned somewhere, but it was an achievement. So, when I started writing 7 years ago, I was going through a really stressful time in life. Actually, the first thing I wrote was about 9 years ago. I was sitting in a deacon's meeting in a church, and I was at the church as kind of a fixer. I was there to help it either close or decide what it was going to become. I'm sitting in this group with a ton of like super wise men that were, decades my senior. And I was talking about something kind of crazy. And they, which I'm sure shocks you. I warned you that if you just let me go, I'll spin like a top. So I was talking to a bunch of men, and one of them told me, they're like, hey, Jeff, why don't you go write all this down for us? This is a lot to digest. Why don't you go write all of it down? We're going to end this meeting. You can go write it down and then bring us the pamphlet. We'll read the pamphlet. So I went home the next day and I was like, I am going to write it down, not realizing that he was just doing me a favor to cut off the meeting. And I wrote a whole, 30-page pamphlet the next day and brought it to him, and he read it because he was very kind. And he was like, you should do more of this. And I can remember thinking back going like, that felt really good. But what felt great wasn't the like nonfiction focused argument I was making. What felt great was the illustrations I was writing. So I wrote little stories into it. I was like, man, I want to write more stories. So I started writing I went online and I found a how to write a short story course at a site called thewritepractice.com, which is still operating, and a great place to start writing if you're going to start. And I started working there. I started working on that course, knocking out a short story a night. I was sitting up, for an hour after my kids had gone to bed, my wife had gone to bed, my house was quiet. I just write whatever came to my mind, just a quick short story. I did that for about a year and a half. And then after that, I went through a really stressful time where I lost the job very suddenly. Didn't have any prospects. My wife was 9 months pregnant with our fifth kid, and she was set to deliver in 2 weeks, and I found myself with no health insurance and no income. We had just bought a new house to kind of move into an area for the job, and my hands were just completely empty. And I told myself, I was like, you know what? I'm never going to be in this place again where I have nothing to lean on and I have no prospects. So that's when I switched to writing novels. And that's why I do all of the things that I do. My why behind the reason that I work, the reason that I edit and ghostwrite and write novels and work for Simmersion full time is that, I want that dual stream of income so that I never find myself in a place where I have nothing. So yeah, it was a rough time, but it birthed this thing in me, overcoming my bias against this dyslexia and my hatred for writing, and really embracing it. So if you had told me 15 years ago, hey, Jeff, in 15 years, you're going to be a full-time writer, doing innovative work for a tech company, ghostwriting, putting out your own fiction, and even editing other people's dialogue, I would have been like, you're insane, because I hate writing. And but now I've grown to a place where I love it, and it's saved my life in a lot of ways.
So you're doing what you love to do.
I am. It's weird. It's not what I thought I would love to do, but I'm doing something that I've learned to love. That may be a better way to put it, because it was tough at first, but I'm doing something that I've learned to love, and something that loves me back a little bit. So, which I think is important with work, is not just doing something that you love, but something that loves you back, that gives you that emotional and mental health so that you can sustain it for the long term. Because there's nothing more painful than writing a novel and finishing that beast. And my first one took me a whole year, finishing that beast, and then thinking that you're going to have a ticker tape parade because you finished it and put it into the world. And then you put it into the world and there are crickets and nobody cares. And there's 50 million other writers that same day that put a book into the world. Nobody cares. And so, you know, if you can't find a way to do it in a manner that brings you health from working on it, you're going to burn out. So for me, it's about finding something that I can love to do that also loves me back a little bit.
Love the same. That's really neat. I don't think I've ever heard that before, but it makes sense. I love it.
It's great.
So do you just like get in the writing zone, or do you say I'm going to write for an hour a day, or I'm going to write so many words a day? What's your process?
That's a great question. I know a lot of, you know, writers work in all different ways. I know writers that like swear by, I have to write in the morning. It has to be the first thing I do. I wake up from my dream and I sit down and I have to get my morning pages out. That's never worked for me. I can't do that. In the morning, I am grumpy. I need coffee and breakfast. And about after 45 minutes of being up, I got 5 kids all over me. So there's no morning pages in the morning. I know other writers that are like, I have to get in the zone and it takes me 30 minutes before I can really get into a flow state. And then, you know, I need my good hour of flow state to get stuff out. I just don't, you know, I work a full-time job. I got 5 kids, 3 of them are teenagers. They got games that they're going to, sporting events. I got to drive them places. You know, life is just too crazy to have 90 minutes sitting around all the time. So for me, what writing a book looks like is, if I have 15 minutes between dinner and putting a kid to bed, instead of like flipping through my phone or playing a game on my phone, which I would sometimes much rather do, or watching TV, I just crack my laptop open and I get as many words as I can.
All of a sudden I'm in the mood, you know, I'll say,
yeah.
And just, I don't know, I'm like, I guess I'm in the zone, and so I'll go write, you know. I know another girl, she says her deal is she writes 500 words a day minimum.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And I think the key is finding a system that works for you, a system that like is going to encourage you and empower you and keep you healthy, because the last thing you want to do is try a system that's going to burn you out. So working on a system that just stresses you out and burns you out, that'll get you about 2 good months, and then you'll stop writing for 7. And then when you try to come back to it, you got to start all over. So yeah, that intermittent writing for me, just, you know, whenever I have free space, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes 2 hours if I can find them. But that, just making sure that I do it every single day, that's what keeps me moving forward. Another trick I do is I have a journal that I walk around with. And I'm constantly, if a thought comes to mind, or I always have the next chapter in my head. So like I'm always running that next chapter in my head. And last night I was doing the dishes and I was listening to a podcast about religion, and all of a sudden a conversation clicked for me that I need to write in the next chapter. So I looked at my 6-year-old and I was like, hey, run down to daddy's desk and get his journal. And so, because my hands were all like wet and full of soap. And so he ran down and he brought it up and I dried off and I wrote it real quick in my journal. I didn't get a chance to actually write it for like another, you know, we're putting kids to bed and I'm hanging out with my teenagers, because teenagers love to talk late at night when all you want to do is go to bed. And so I was hanging out with my teenagers and it was like, okay, finally I have about, you know, a little bit of time. But because I had already scribbled it out in my journal, the beats were all there and like the structure was there, so I could just go ahead and flow through it. Took me about 45 minutes to get that chapter out. So yeah, running, for me, it's that like whenever I find time doing it and then keeping it in my head at all times and running that, making sure I'm leaving myself notes if I can't get to a keyboard right away.
That's important. The notes I find are super important.
Yes, because you think, oh, I'll remember that, and then about 2 minutes later, it's gone. You can't bring it back for nothing.
Yeah, I ain't gonna remember nothing. Yeah, they disappear so fast. Yeah.
So Jeff, how can our listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to find my fiction, if you want to find the novels I wrote, or if you want to talk to me about maybe ghostwriting your book. So if you got a book in your head and you don't know how to start and you need a mentor to help you, come look me up. You can find me at jeffelkinswriter.com. If you're looking for coaching on dialogue, if you're a writer and you want help with your fiction, and you're looking for somebody to help you really engage readers in a deep way, come and find me at dialoguedoctor.com. The good news is if you go to one site, there's a link that'll lead you to the other. So jeffelkinswriter.com or dialoguedoctor.com, you can flip back and forth and find me in either of those places.
Great.
Great. Thank
Do
you
you
so
have
much.
something, Lorianne?
I just think it's fascinating. I love it. And definitely, I think that it really does help. And like you said, writing is a muscle. I've been writing since I was a kid. But one thing I found was when I went and I took a writing course, it was like night and day at the end of it. You may think, oh, I'm such a great writer, but you always have room for growth. So
Yeah, and so much of what I find courses have done for me in the past is they give me that accountability I need to move forward. So a lot of times, if I'm struggling with something, I'll jump into a community and let that community kind of fuel me. Like I'm part of a community right now called the Author TASM, the Successful Author Mastermind. Sorry, I know the acronym, but not what it means. The Successful Author Mastermind. It's a fantastic community. If you're a fiction writer, I have a community at the Dialogue Doctor. We have a Slack channel. We do a writing prompt every Wednesday. Today's writing prompt was write a conversation between your protagonist and a therapist, in which the therapist asks your protagonist a question your protagonist doesn't want to answer. And in that group, we do dialogue only drafts. So it looks more like a screenplay. You're just writing the dialogue. But yeah, if people want that's they can be part of that community via my Patreon, which you can find over at dialoguedoctor.com. But yeah, so I think Lorianne, you're spot on to that. Like getting it, if you're struggling to write and if you're struggling to discipline yourself to do it, so much of that I find for me is about internal anxiety and fear. And like overcoming that barrier, a lot of times what you need is a community around you. Sitting alone in a shack, like the image we have of the writer that sits alone in a shack in the woods and produces this great masterpiece, that image is total crap. It's not real at all. What happens is you get around another community of writers, another community of creatives, and you all create your things together. And you inspire one another, you hold each other accountable, you push past those anxieties together. So yeah, if you're a struggling writer, get in a community. It's going to help you 1,000-fold.
thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Jeff, it was really a pleasure having you on. I enjoyed everything you talked about. Very, very interesting.
Thanks, Roy. It was a lot of fun to be on. Again, thanks for having me on. I love the Lift podcast. So I'll keep listening behind the scenes and pretending like I'm talking to you every week.
Beautiful.
That's okay. We're gonna have you back at some point in the future.
Oh, it'd be great. I'm totally in for it. So here's Roy. Here's when I want to come back. I'm currently writing a novel on. It's a fictionalized memoir, meaning it's about 10% my story and about 90% crap I made up. And it's on my processing of religion and as a pastor, my coming to grips with what it means to be a person of faith. And the reason I'm bringing it up is I'll have it out around June or July. So I'll hit you up to come back on then and we can talk about it. Because we didn't get to talk about that much tonight. But if a listener wants to write it with me, if you go to jeffelkinswriter.com, my newsletter, I'm live writing it on Google Docs. So you can actually read it as I write it and leave me comments, and we're kind of writing it as a community. So if you're interested in that topic and want to jump into it, that's a good way to engage, a fun way to engage with my writing. But yeah, I'll take you up on that, and I'll come back when the book's actually done.
Cool, that'd be great.
I'm 32 of 93 chapters in, so I'm about a third of the way done, pushing through it.
Right.
Excellent. We will see you then in June or July.
Awesome. Thank you, Lorianne. I'll I'll hit y'all back up then. And thanks again for today. This was great.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit us at lifterstory.com.